Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Humanities for the Public Good Symposium. My name is Ashley Melzer. I am Director of HPG, and I'm your host for this session, which is our last session of the week. And we're really excited for today's conversation, and we'd love to hear your comments or questions that you have. Please throw those in the chat as they come to mind. In case you aren't already aware, if you haven't been watching some of earlier this week's content, our host this week is Humanities for the Public Good, which is an initiative funded by Andrew W. Mellon on campus that works to really connect scholars and community within and beyond UNC Chapel Hill. And today's presentation of Matchmake is a project just like that. It's a project where we're having grad students work with artists and create something new, which is really exciting. Before we get started, we feel it's important as stewards of public engagement to acknowledge that the Triangle overlaps with the historic territories of Siouan, Iroquois, and Algonquin indigenous communities, and today their descendants belong to sovereign nations that continue to resist systematic erasure. We want to honor them whose land we are on, and also the enslaved people whose labor built the wealth and laid the foundation of our university. We recognize the persistent realities of that history, and we invite you to work beside us to create that change. For today's conversation, like I said, we're digging into some artist projects where we paired grad students with artists. The way today's going to work is we're going to bring up each pair to talk about their project, to share their project for the very first time. I think I have had the pleasure of seeing their work early, and I'm excited to share it with you. Also, before we get started, I want to say a special thanks to Arts Everywhere. Today is actually Arts Everywhere Day on campus. I want to thank Crystal Wu and Catherine Wagner of Arts Everywhere for helping me tease out this idea before we got it started. So for our first project, I'd like to please welcome Jacob Griffin and Jessica Stark. Hey guys, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having
us. Hello, thank you for having us. Yeah.
So Jacob, you are a grad student. What department are you in?
I am in the Department of Anthropology. I'm a biological anthropologist.
Okay, and Jessica, what's your background?
So I finished a PhD at Duke in 2020, and I'm now based in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm a poet, and I am an educator. I teach writing at the University of North Florida.
Great. Well, you two, can you talk a little bit about, so we paired you two to work on a project, potentially a poem, but it was kind of up to you to create something. What were some of the interests and ideas that you were bringing into a project like this? Maybe Jacob, you could tell us a little bit more about what it means to be a biological anthropologist.
Yeah, so anthropology is the study of humans, and it's a very holistic discipline that incorporates in a lot of different aspects and a lot of different disciplines within that. So as a biological anthropologist, I'm really interested in human health and human variation from an evolutionary perspective, but also looking at contemporary modern populations to understand variations in health. So it's really an intersection between cultural anthropology, biological anthropology, and some aspects of public health as well. So coming into this project, I was excited to work with a really fantastic collaborator who could kind of tell the story of my research in ways that I never even could myself. So that's why I was excited about coming into this in the first place.
Yeah. So Jessica, what were you bringing in? We don't necessarily think of poets as being like, or as like gravitating towards scientific or health things like that, but I know that you are maybe a bit different.
Yeah. So I came in, and when you paired me with Jacob, I admit I was like a little bit nervous or like scared because I don't have a background in biomedical anything. But I think it was kind of serendipitous because I have been designing courses around creative writing that is geared towards medical professionals. Mayo Clinic has a big presence near University of North Florida, so I've been sort of tackling that problem, so that felt really relevant. As well, I have finished, but have been working on a new manuscript of poetry based around my mother and her experiences. She immigrated to the United States when she, in 1975, in her mid-20s. And I was just really interested in thinking about the body, the diasporic body, as well as, concepts like epigenetic trauma and the way we carry certain unquantifiable things in our bodies over space and over time. So that really sang to me in terms of when I was working through Jacob's research, and I was really drawn to the way Jacob has an attention to, the unquantifiable and inflammation and environmental factors that, inform representations and manifestations of the body and aging. So for me, that really struck a chord, and that's kind of what I brought to the project.
Great. So what were your conversations like leading up to creating this piece?
Well, our first few conversations, Jess, were really kind of just getting to know each other and kind of getting a grasp on what each other really do. As Jess said, she doesn't have much of a science background, and I, definitely don't have a poetry background. So I think that was what really kind of made it exciting. So I think a lot of our initial conversations were really kind of grasping at what the goal, right, what the agenda of my research was, and then how Jess could kind of formulate this poem around it. She asked me, one of the first questions was, what is your passion behind this project? What is driving it? And that's something I've never been asked before in a grant application, or, all those things that I do as sort of a social scientist. So that was really a really big step for me in terms of putting words to why this was meaningful to me. So.
Yeah. And, I've been reading, and that was really important to me just in terms of, how I approach poetry is really like via matters of the heart. And talking with Jacob, it really made me realize the heart stakes, I guess, within this kind of anthropological work, which I found like I could just grasp and run with it because it felt like, peripherally really relevant to what I've been already working on with the book. I'm a researcher, by trade. So when I'm in sort of panicky indecision, I just bury myself in research. So I think in the beginning conversations, Jacob, I was like, I'm reading this like Eros and Illness book by this guy, David B. Morris, which was like a kind of like biomedical re-examination of like the medical profession and the medical industry via desire, and like thinking about desire and personal memoir and narrative and how that, should have a bigger presence or inflection within the medical profession and how we think about care and caring for others and bodies. So yeah, the conversations were just sort of loose and playful, and I feel like we were both pretty just open with each other in terms of, where Jacob was thankfully very open with me, because I was just like, okay, do you want me to do anything specific? And Jacob was really open for that sort of play, which I think is really important in a collaboration.
Yeah. So before we share your poem, which Jessica's going to read for us here in a second, what do you, can you name what your agenda was or what your like goal was with this poem? And it might be different for each of you.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to, and I didn't really like plot out, and I never really plot out anything when I sit down to write a poem, although I'm the very diligent to a fault deadline maker. So I remember I was like very like, I have to make this deadline. And I told Jacob, and then I extended it for like another week. I love self-imposed deadlines. I'm kind of a weirdo in that sense, but, so I knew it was going to come. It was just that, like, I had read enough material, and I had read enough of Jacob's material, and then we had a conversation about it, and I felt good about being on the same page as like the impetus of his research. So I really wanted to be true to that. But I also knew that I couldn't just make a poem out of your dissertation. It would feel inorganic and really weird. So I guess I didn't really have a plan for it when I sat down, but I think I feel good about how it came out. What do you think, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and this is one of the first things I told Jess, I was like, our creativities are in two sort of different realms, right? In the sense of like, I'm creative from a very like scientific perspective and a research design, a statistical modeling sort of way. While Jess, is with the research and the poetry and her passions about social justice. So I really wanted this poem just to tell a story and to really put into words, what I've been working on, but also what Jess works on. In academia, we often just write for each other and it's not understandable and accessible to the public. So I was excited to have an artistic piece that was for everyone that could combine our passions.
Great. Well, we're going to read the poem. We're also, Jessica created an image that goes with it that we'll put online, or we'll put on screen right now so you can see that as the poem is read. So whenever you're ready.
Thanks. And the poem is titled Nervous Endings. And it comes with 2 epigraphs. Eros is everywhere. It is what binds. And the second epigraph. She's young in age, but knows her sage. She knows a page or 2 from the Book of Luck by Princess Nokia. Nervous endings. Like a probable god, I am the archetype of a shape. Small desires at the end of my arms and nose, of houses and undone hours against bone. This is a memory test. I am going to read a list of words that you will have to remember now and later on. Listen carefully. When I'm through, tell me as many words as you can remember. It doesn't matter in what order you say them. Village, love, body, airplane, war, sacrifice, ocean, food, family. What happens against a body occupied? A clock's antidote to a gone village, gone home for dispersion and absence, a little string laid out on life's plank. On the phone, my mother worries about her death, what time it will be, who will care, who will take. She drinks green tea against life's petty inflammations, childhood of rice, childhood of smallpox, of dirty water and dead brothers, her mother's infection impressing upon the fabric of her body like loose thread. I'm older now, she says. A little incantation as permission to stay stone still against memories stable, the food between us that she lets rot. I'm going to read the same list for a second time. Try to remember and tell me as many words as you can, including words you said the first time. Family, sacrifice, love, village, airplane, ocean, food, body, war. What of a village? My mother left an airplane and returned 20 years later to a hole in her body, my body, like a net of decisions unmade. You can resist death, but you can't refuse water, can't garbage a little white lie. She says the first time she saw the ocean, she was up so high, moving away from every known word through blue sky. She moves slower now and dyes her hair weakly against love's firmament. What is an age but accumulation, but a finite template for life's choices, to move, to be still, to love plainly, or to survive? I will ask you to recall those words again at the end of the test. Airplane food, village sacrifice, family love, body war, ocean, ocean, ocean. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I know we want to hear more from you. If you are watching and you have a question for these two, save it. We're going to bring them back at the end. But for now, we're going to bring up our next pair. Please welcome up Iris Gottlieb and Elias Gross. Hey, guys. How's it going?
Hello. Happy to be here.
So tell me what you brought into this project. You did something very different. Iris is an illustrator, right?
Yes. Yeah, we did. Do you want me to start, Iris? Okay. So we created together, Iris illustrated a panel of kind of moments from my research subject, Aunt Molly Jackson, who is an Appalachian balladeer active in the early part of the 20th century. And because she was a singer and a union activist and a midwife and all of these many things, she, kind of deals in stories and storytelling and songwriting. So we were able to kind of communicate the material back and forth to each other, like mostly through telling stories.
Yeah, so Iris, you're an illustrator, but I'm sure you have written several books. Like, you don't normally illustrate things like Aunt Molly Jackson. What do you come to this work with?
I mean, I illustrate all sorts of things for all sorts of people. So some very niche and related to history. But yeah, I mean, I think part of it ties to some of my work around gender and, writing about that in a non-officially scholarly way, but also drawing those themes. So it was interesting to learn about her, and I enjoyed hearing her stories and her history and trying to come up with a visualization of what Elias's work entails, and what was important to him about her.
Yeah, so Elias, I think we all know, those of us in the academic world, that when you commit to a dissertation project or even a master's thesis, it's a lot of work and attention. And what do you think it is that draws you to Aunt Molly Jackson, if you can encapsulate it?
Yeah, so the project started my first semester here. I'm in a master's PhD program in musicology, and we were supposed to go into the Wilson archives at UNC in the Southern Folklife Collection and listen to the recordings of Mike Seeger, but I'm me. So I found a moment of Aunt Molly Jackson in the Mike Seeger collection and then fell into the Archie Green collection. And that was kind of the beginning of the rest of the story for me. So, and the recording that I heard of her was her singing Amazing Grace, which is like nothing like she sings in any other like part of her repertoire. She sang old like Anglo-Saxon ballads. She sang protest songs that she wrote, which a lot of the times were like recomposed from old hymn melodies, but like Amazing Grace is kind of an outlier in her repertoire. So instead I found this whole body of like protest music, and you come to learn these people. I'm a musician. I played old time on mandolin and viola, so I knew a little bit about her life and a little bit about kind of this world. And I lived in Kentucky for about a decade, so this work is all very close and important to me. But when you think about like folk music, the people that come to mind are like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie and those guys, and like those guys only had a career because of people like Aunt Molly Jackson. So it's important to me to kind of like meet her in the history and figure out what she really had to say and how I can be a part of showing her value to the movement in that way.
Mm-hmm. I remember talking to you, and you sort of described her in this way that made her feel like a superhero to me.
She is. And that's been, I think, the coolest part about getting to see the illustration that Iris put together, because she looks like how I see her. And that's been so powerful, especially as I'm, working through the end of my thesis here. But yeah, I mean, she, living in Kentucky in the first couple decades of the 20th century, was a midwife who, depending on the source, delivered 100 babies or maybe 5,000, unsure, and like scholars were really frustrated by her because she would change things, right? So like she would change the facts, but she was a storyteller, so it like was suit to fit. She was a midwife. She fought in what was called the Battle of Evarts, which was this 15-minute shootout between the sheriffs who'd been bought off by the coal companies and the miners themselves. And she was just this like larger than life person who got involved with organizing for the unions and then kind of sucked up into New York to agitate for the miners, and got a little bit of spotlight on the national stage, but not really. So yeah, I mean, I see her as a folk hero for sure.
Yeah. So Iris, when Elias is talking, there's so much there, right? There's so many angles. How do you as an illustrator sort of listen to all of that and hone in?
Well, I requested to give me the highlight reel of like specific instances in her life or stories or, you know, important feelings about her. And he ended up sending me 4 moments in her life that were important. And so I tried to make like somewhat of a visual timeline of that, that call out those moments. It kind of goes back and forth. Like she's old on the left and young on the right. But she starts on the left, goes to the right, and goes back to the left of the image. So mostly it was finding ways to represent her in those key parts of her life.
Yeah, you mentioned
and to make
earlier,
her kind of larger than life in one aspect of it.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that this sort of connects to your other work on gender. How so? How do you think?
I mean, from our conversation, she, you know, was described as doing feminist labor and being somebody who stood out in that time period as, you know, a very powerful woman who had the attention of a lot of people in maybe a way that was unusual for the time. And also somebody who got kind of screwed over by her gender by recording companies and in terms of financial profiting from her work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You want to add anything to that, Elias?
Yeah. My the feminist labor thing is kind of the crux of my thesis, that I am going back through all of these interviews and primary sources from her and trying to kind of show that she was able to compose music, to write these songs and perform them in what I'm calling feminist musical labor. So in service of the women's auxiliaries of the unions, which were kind of a parallel leadership structure with the male miners, and in making sure that, you know, the collective was being taken care of. So like working in the soup kitchens and taking care of other people's kids. So all these different kind of ways of like decentering the focus on just the male miners and making sure that, you know, we're really like expressing solidarity across the different interests and needs of people. For example, like the Red Cross was present in the region, but they were denying aid to anyone affiliated with the National Miners Union because they were communist. So very few people were able to get that aid because most people were in the union, and they had to figure out ways around that. And she was a big part of that.
Cool. Well, I'm going to bring up the image now. And if you guys want to talk us through it, or if Elias, you can share what those moments are that are being translated. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Oh man, it's so exciting to see this. Yeah. So like Iris said, I shared some, I guess, highlight reel, and I know it like took forever picking which ones I was going to share, and ended up realizing that probably the best way to communicate what I thought about this was to retell them as stories myself. As a Southern person who spent a lot of time living in Central Kentucky. So, you know, I feel like I can put myself in that tradition a little bit. But I guess like bottom left, we've got just an illustration of what coal mining sort of looked like at the time. So this was not the big industrialized coal mining. It was very dangerous. At least one of Aunt Molly's husbands died because of a rock fall within a mine. Her brother did as well. And then going up is the company housing that they would have been living in. So we use terminology like coal camps. And these were sort of like settlements built by the mining companies, and some of them were very nice. Lynch, Kentucky was sometimes called like the New York of Appalachia, which is weird, but it is what it is. But then some of them were basically just plywood taped together. So it really depended. And then the scene on the top left is my favorite, and I will save that for the end of this current narration. The bus is like her being taken to New York for the first time in 1931, and this big moment on the right that I love so much, especially just with all of the color, is her speaking to this gathering of 10,000 people who were gathered in support of the National Hunger Marchers in 1931, who were headed down to DC. So not only is this a time of like coal violence really between bosses and miners, but it's also in the middle of the Great Depression. So there was just a lot going on. So to return to this part in the left here, this is the story that I will try to briefly summarize, but I refer to it as Aunt Molly's Kool-Aid moment. And so she recorded this one record, as Iris mentioned, for Columbia Records in 1931. And they told her that she would get 15% after the strike died down in 1932, but surprise, that never happens. So a few years later, she goes back to visit some family in Kentucky and overhears people crying and saying, like, oh, it's so terrible that Aunt Molly is dead. How I would give anything to see her one more time. And her song is playing on the record, the 78 in the background. And of course, she is intrigued by this, how 1,500 copies of a record that never sold got down to the coal fields of southeastern Kentucky. But also, this is a great moment for her to be cheeky and have a kind of a moment of the upper hand over her friends. So she throws in the door and says, like, oh, yes. And they're obviously surprised to see that she is not dead. Yeah, that's my favorite part of it. And I love too, like, having the other characters there, you know, and especially kind of being out of a timeline, I came to really like that, you know, this is really just a creative re-envisioning of what, you know, we take these stories to be about. So I like that it gets to kind of go back and forth and also have the people that looked like the people that were in her life, whether they were in that room or not at the time.
Yeah, I love it so much. It was so good when Iris sent it over. I was like, of course, this is what they came up with. Well, thank you both. We're gonna hear from you again in just a second. Again, if you have questions, please throw them into the comments. But for now, I'm going to bring up Kamara Thomas. Kamara worked with grad student Deanna Corrin, who unfortunately had a family emergency this morning and couldn't join us. But we're so thankful that Kamara could. Deanna is a geography student. Kamara, can you tell us a little bit about what you and Deanna were bringing into this project, and a little bit, you know, about what's your history?
Sure. So yeah, Deanna is a geography. Is it a geographer? And her thesis was exploring or is exploring the campfires out in California and some of the kind of structural, you know, some of the storytelling there and kind of the structural things in place that were creating you know, different inequities in how that area was able to recover. And so a lot of what we talked about, and I think what she was exploring in her thesis, it's funny, I'm like, is that what she was exploring in her thesis, or is that what we just ended up talking about? You know, you know, but we ended up talking a lot about this idea of solastalgia, which is the disruption that happens, this kind of like liminal space and disruption that happens when disaster kind of comes through and kind of decimates your sense of place, or your, you know, in this case, you know, these fires that came through and kind of, you know, just kind of decimated people's homes and kind of instantly relocated them to other places. And sort of what happens in society when these disasters kind of come through. You know, we saw this a lot with like Katrina too, right? Or these kind of big disasters that happen. Of course, my children come out the minute that I have to come out. You know, and how, you know, there's this focus that the country or that the kind of general public will put on these places as like, oh, wow, there's this big disaster happening. Like, you know, we're so sorry. And then we kind of forget about it, but that there are still these communities that are still displaced and still kind of having to ride out this really long, drawn out, seemingly never ending process of recovery. And then how that recovery even takes shape for certain people based on their socioeconomic status, based on whether they seem like they're deserving of recovery efforts or recovery funds, or and how, you know, how these kind of hierarchical patriarchal structures are still in place even when aid is given or recovery efforts are put forth too. And that idea of like, you know, these disasters kind of come through, and then there are these communities that are still dealing with a kind of, you know, never-ending liminal space inside that recovery, and how it makes it even harder for them to then actually recover and regain a sense of place. And so, you know, in my work, I'm pretty much obsessed with place and the where of things, and specifically, you know, obsessed with America and the land and what kind of happens to the land here, and how we, you know, what generation after generation, the lineages that are placed on top of the land. And a lot of my songwriting has to do with storytelling and trying to, you know, uncover and comb through the land and try to find the stories that have been forgotten. And you know, what stories, especially in like country and Americana, where the stories are of America really reside as a genre. They're kind of, you know, country and Americana are where America kind of keeps its stories musically. And so I'm really concerned with how to recover, you know, these lost stories from America in those genres specifically, as, you know, which we can see over the past, few years have really been getting a lot of attention for how messed up they are in terms of whose stories get to be told and why. So that was a lot of our conversation between the conversations between Deanna and I were about how to evoke a sense of that soul nostalgia in our piece. And you know, for me, I started to, you know, I've been exploring more field sounds lately, and you know, I'm not much of an engineer, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna take this project on, and I'm gonna do everything myself and try to engineer these, you know, this kind of a sound collage, using some of my own music and vocalizing, but then also finding different field sounds to figure out how to evoke that sense of soul nostalgia and the sense of you know, disruption in people's place, and how society interacts with disaster and the way that disasters impact communities. So yeah.
I remember when Deanna defined soul nostalgia for me, it was related to like nostalgia and like longing, and soul nostalgia was sort of like being at home and not being able to recognize it. There's like this thing that you
very
can't touch
wobbly
about.
and nebulous, and it's like it's really such a strange feeling, and it probably feels different to everyone who experiences it. So we're trying to figure out like how to evoke this feeling. And
I think that when you say that, and then I think about the piece, I've had the privilege of listening to it already and seeing it also, is I think at first you're like, oh, why not words? necessarily. Like, why didn't you put words to this? But I think it does feel like this concept that you can't really put words to. But I won't spoil any more of it. I'm just going to play it. So give me one, pull it up. And here we go. Here's Deanna and Kamara's piece.
Oh no.
There we go. That's just so powerful. I think.
I'm glad it evoked. I would love to know if people found a feeling there, because you never know how it's going to land.
Please comment. Please post in the comments. We already have one right here. I'm going to bring up everybody now so that we can have sort of a wider conversation about this project, or about doing artistic work in this way. If you do have a question for someone specifically or more generally, please let us know. I think my first question is just sort of, what surprised you about working in this way, or working with someone that you had not met before? And you can just jump in.
I found it fun. As an artist, it's so easy to get wrapped up in my own process and the things I'm interested in and the things that I'm up to. And so it was really neat to be able to bounce off someone. I think what we find is, like, you think you're bouncing off of someone out of left field, but there's always a point of reference that you can find that also led me deeper into my work, but also helped me to see things in a completely new way through Deanna's research. So it was very rewarding to just get to bounce ideas off someone who'd gone down a different rabbit hole than I'd gone to, but who was semi-related to my own rabbit holes.
What about for the grad students? How did it feel to have work that's usually so academic, be taken in this way?
I found it rewarding. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but it's reminded me of why I am interested in my topic and why I'm interested in doing this for my dissertation, right? My end goal is to promote healthy aging, right? To think about ways that we can combat inflammation. I never saw what my project was about, but it's about inflammation and aging in North Carolina. So I think working with somebody who can kind of help me remind my focus, instead of just constantly thinking about getting a paper out, getting a grant app out, getting a manuscript out, which is what your life is for the last 5 years of my dissertation. So it was really rewarding, and fulfilling in that sense for me.
I found it to be a great chance to just be excited about my research and talk to somebody about it in a new way. And the challenge for me is actually like organizing my enthusiasm into scholarship. I can talk about it all day long. So I found it actually really freeing to just be able to tell stories and to talk about what I think is important in my work without, you know, the like fraught writing process necessarily being right around the corner, which of course it is because, you know, we do what we do. But I remember a moment in our meetings talking to Iris about Aunt Molly Jackson and you saying that a friend had known about her. And that was a really exciting point because I'm mostly talking about somebody that no one's ever heard of before, but to know that people who are invested in music or have connections to folk practice or labor studies or anything like that, like know about this person is so exciting to be able to continue to expand this work and talk about like, you know, what it means in a bigger sense.
What do you think makes for a good collaboration? Any of you can go for this.
For me, it was communication and openness, you know, just really communicating what we wanted out of the collaboration, but more importantly, getting to know each other and just being open to experiment, which is something you don't often get to do in academia. So that was also really fulfilling in terms of the collaboration as well.
Yeah, I feel that I've been having this motto in the past year or so of like trying to say yes to projects well. So in thinking about that, like for me, I just really wanted to be accountable to Jacob and to Jacob's research, and what really allowed that to happen is open communication. And again, for me, self-imposed deadlines, but also just like being clear about, you know, like what my intentions in terms of producing were, when I was going to do it, just so I could get some feedback, you know, and just make sure I was accountable to Jacob in terms of, you know, his research.
I see this this question over in the comments about did learning about these new subjects bring any new perspective to other projects, and will the collaborations inform future art practices? And definitely, I've got this. You know, I've got kind of a big umbrella project that's kind of a musical theater work that's all about America. Everything I'm doing is always all about America. But it was really cool, and even just listening to this forum, especially about what Iris and Elias did too. These American characters, you know, and realizing how much how deep scholars dive into things and are able to kind of pull out things, you know, from the root that that lots of times artists don't necessarily, you know, unless we're going down our own rabbit hole, you know, we don't have time to kind of do all of that digging. And it just kind of, I was like, wow, you know, I bet there are a lot of scholars I could speak with who might have really neat characters to draw out of, to draw into some of the pieces that I'm making in the future.
Yeah, that's cool.
To piggyback off of Kamara's points is like, I felt like, again, like when I first was assigned Jacob, I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? But I think I had, for me, it was really enlightening because I think I had similar resistance when my department was like, oh, do you think you can make a connection between creative writing and like these medical professionals at Mayo Clinic? And I was just like, no, what, no. But, you know, the more I kind of leaned into it, it's just like the heart stakes, right, are here in terms of understanding people better, connecting with people better, you know, thinking about our bodies in interesting ways. It's like, these are concepts I've been thinking about, but just in a different shadow and a different contour. And I think that really relates to what Kamara was saying in terms of like, you know, digging yourself out of these rabbit holes that you've put yourself into as an artist, as a thinker. So for me, that was really engaging in terms of expanding the parameters by which I approach poetry and my educational practice.
Yeah. Anyone else, do you think that this project will inform research or arts practices?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think being able to, now that we have this image that Iris has created of like, you know, what we interpret in Aunt Molly's life to be like, this helps my overall project of demonstrating that Appalachia has been super diverse the whole time. And we don't have a lot of those images, and now we have a new one. And yes, it's an illustration. We only have like 10 pictures of Aunt Molly Jackson anyway, so like, who cares? You know, we're not looking for the secret source photo. But now we have this image of this person's life, which was between New York and Kentucky and had people of all backgrounds in it. And what this project opened up for me, another project actually, about listening to, or I guess constructing the sounds of the coal camps, particularly with the influence of all the European immigrants who came in to work in the coal fields. So you have this really incredible site of like sonic mixing and musical transmission in these remote communities in Appalachia that we don't really know a lot about. So these, I mean, just even doing something like this of telling the story again, translating it in a new way for a new person helps you uncover parts of your research or maybe, you know, like directions that you didn't think that you would take.
I love that. It makes me think of, there's a podcast that I like where they talk about like what makes something sacred. And one of their definitions is that it's generative, that it's like, it's not a text that like is pure and it's fixed. It's something that like, gets recreated and reinterpreted, embraced by different people. So being able to take these ideas that feel like fixed in some way as academic and like generating new versions of them, I think is a really fun way to imagine this as like sacred work.
I like that.
For me, it's nice to hear the effect of it for you, because my whole MO in my like work and writing and books is to make inaccessible information accessible, of like, you're not dumb, anyone can understand this. And like, if reading or writing is not your strong suit, to make drawings that actually help convey information and not just are pretty. So, and like my own feelings of academia being very locked away to most people, and so being like, here's what I can do to help with my own feelings about that, and also maybe help other people not feel like that information is just not possible for them to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've loved so much about working with the Center for Study of the American South here at UNC is that we've said that we value all forms of wisdom. And so I see that in the illustration of being like, this is a way of telling the story of wisdom. And I see the same thing in storytelling styles and the way that songs were written. So yeah, it doesn't need to be locked away in an article. And honestly, like, I think that Aunt Molly would be mad if it was. She was really about teaching unity, about teaching people through song. And so you start to ask questions about, you know, what is an expression that would be authentic to the person that I'm studying, that I'm interested in. And it really does just open up the story so much more.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for being a part of this. It's been a couple months long process. I'm so thrilled that you all, I think you were all the people I asked first to work with, and you all said yes, which is a real joy. We're going to throw the links to Iris, Kamara, and Jessica's websites in the comments. Buy art is my recommendation if you like what you saw. We're also going to, next week, I will put the work that they created up on the HPG website so you can take a little more time to look at it. and appreciate what they've done here because we love it so much. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank
That
you.
was super fun and inspiring.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.